Have you ever asked yourself, why do good people suffer? Imagine losing everything you've ever worked for, your wealth, your family, your health, all in a single day. Could you still hold on to your faith? This is the story of Job, a man who was blameless, righteous, and deeply devoted to God. He had everything: a prosperous life, a loving family, and respect from all. But in the blink of an eye, it was all taken from him. Would you curse God in your darkest moment? Or would you trust Him, even when the pain seems unbearable? Today, we uncover the test of Job, a story of faith, suffering, and redemption that will challenge everything you think you know about your own faith. 1. The heavenly conversation. In the unseen realms of heaven, where mysteries unfold beyond human understanding, an extraordinary gathering took place. The angels of the Lord assembled to present themselves before God, their Creator and Sovereign King. Among them, uninvited yet present by divine allowance, was Satan, the accuser, the adversary of humankind. God spoke first, His voice full of majesty and authority. "Where have you come from?" Satan answered, his tone sly and filled with veiled contempt. "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." It was a seemingly simple response, but it revealed the restless and malevolent nature of Satan's mission. He wandered the earth, not as an aimless traveler, but as a predator seeking opportunities to sow doubt, destruction, and despair. God, knowing the depths of every heart and the sincerity of His servant Job, asked, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Here, God held Job up as a shining example of human faithfulness and devotion. Job wasn't merely obedient. He was a man who actively avoided sin and sought righteousness. His life, blessed and prosperous, reflected the fruit of a heart fully committed to God. But Satan, ever the skeptic and cynic, responded with a sneer. "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds spread throughout the land. But now, stretch out your hand and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." With these words, Satan leveled a direct challenge to God's assertion of Job's faithfulness. He implied that Job's devotion wasn't genuine, that it was transactional, a response to the blessings and protection God had lavished upon him. According to Satan, Job's faith wasn't rooted in love or reverence for God, but in the material prosperity and comfort he enjoyed. God, unshaken and knowing the purity of Job's heart, replied, "Very well, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself, do not lay a finger." With this decree, God set the stage for a profound test, one that would challenge Job's faith and demonstrate the depth of his devotion. Yet even in granting this permission, God imposed a boundary, a limit to Satan's reach. Job's life and physical well-being were to remain untouched, for now. Satan left the presence of the Lord, his purpose clear and his determination resolute. In this moment, the heavenly conversation revealed a deep truth about the spiritual realities that govern human existence. Job's suffering wasn't a punishment, nor was it a random act of misfortune. It was a test, one allowed by God but instigated by Satan's doubt in the authenticity of human faith. The scene transitioned back to earth, where Job, unaware of the dialogue that had taken place in the heavens, went about his daily life, blissfully oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf him. This heavenly conversation is a pivotal moment, not just in the story of Job, but in understanding the nature of faith itself. It raises profound questions. Is faith genuine if it is never tested? Does devotion to God depend on the blessings we receive? Or can it endure through suffering and loss? As Satan departed, his malice palpable, the stage was set for Job to face the most severe trials of his life. The world would soon see whether Job's faith was transactional, as Satan claimed, or rooted in an unshakable trust in God's sovereignty and goodness. 2. The calamity strikes. Job's life was a masterpiece of divine blessing, a life that many could only dream of. As the wealthiest man in the East, he was known for his vast herds of livestock, his numerous servants, and his 10 beloved children. Every morning, Job would rise early to offer sacrifices on behalf of his family, saying to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This devotion was a testament to his righteousness, not only before men but also before God. Job's life appeared untouchable, a fortress built on faith and favor. But in a realm beyond human sight, a challenge had been issued, a cosmic wager that would test the very foundation of Job's faith. Satan, the accuser, had claimed that Job's devotion was conditional, tied to the blessings and protections God had given him. God, knowing the heart of his servant, permitted Satan to take away everything Job possessed, save for his life. And so, the stage was set for a series of calamities that would descend upon Job like a relentless storm. The day began as any other, with the sun rising over Job's fields, casting golden light on the rolling pastures filled with sheep and cattle. Servants moved about their tasks, tending to the flocks and preparing for the family's daily routines. Job likely spent the morning in prayer, his thoughts focused on God and the well-being of his household. He could not have known that this ordinary day would end in extraordinary devastation. The first sign of trouble came suddenly. A lone servant appeared on the horizon, running as though his life depended on it. His clothes were torn, his face was pale, and his breathing was ragged as he fell at Job's feet. The servant's voice trembled as he delivered the news. The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys were grazing nearby. Suddenly, the Sabaeans attacked. They stole the animals and killed all the workers. "I am the only one who escaped to tell you." Job's heart sank as he tried to process the loss. The oxen, essential for plowing the fields, and the donkeys, a cornerstone of transportation, were gone. Worse still, the servants who had worked so diligently to care for them had been slaughtered. Job barely had time to absorb this shock when another servant arrived, his face contorted with fear. "Fire from heaven!" the second messenger cried out. Lightning fell from the sky and struck the sheep and the shepherds. It burned everything. "I am the only one who escaped to tell you." The sheep, numbering 7,000, had been a symbol of Job's wealth and provision. They were more than a source of income. They represented God's favor. And now, in an instant, they were reduced to ashes, along with the shepherds who had cared for them. The implication of fire from heaven was deeply troubling. Could this be a sign of God's displeasure? But Job's trial was far from over. As the second messenger spoke, third arrived, his expression one of sheer desperation. "The Chaldeans," he shouted. "They formed 3 raiding parties. They attacked us and stole all the camels. They killed the servants who were with them. I am the only one who escaped to tell you." The camels, critical for trade and transport across vast distances, had been another cornerstone of Job's wealth. Their loss was a devastating blow to his livelihood. Yet even as this third calamity was being reported, Job's greatest sorrow was about to unfold. The final servant approached, his step slow, his face streaked with tears. Job could feel his own heart pounding as he braced himself for what was to come. The servant knelt before him and said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting at the house of your eldest son." Suddenly, a great wind came from the desert. It struck the 4 corners of the house, and it collapsed on them. "They are all dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you." In that moment, time seemed to stop. The laughter of his children, which had once filled his home with joy, was silenced. The house that had been a place of celebration and unity was now a tomb. Job's heart was shattered. His 10 children, his pride and joy, the ones he had prayed and sacrificed for daily, were gone. The weight of this series of calamities would have crushed any other man. Job had lost his wealth, his livelihood, and his family in a single day. The sheer magnitude of his losses defied comprehension. Yet Job's response was unlike anything the world had ever seen. He stood up, tore his robe, and shaved his head, traditional acts of mourning in his culture. Then he fell to the ground, but not in despair or rage. He fell to worship. Through his tears, Job spoke words that would echo through the ages. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job's response was a profound declaration of faith. He acknowledged the sovereignty of God, even in the face of unimaginable loss. He did not curse God or demand an explanation. Instead, he chose to trust, to surrender his pain to the one who had given him everything in the first place. Through all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. His faith remained unshaken, even as his world lay in ruins. This response, though extraordinary, was only the beginning of Job's journey. Greater challenges lay ahead, as the accuser was not yet finished with his cruel attempts to undermine Job's devotion. The story of Job's calamities is not just a tale of loss, but a testament to the strength of faith under fire. It asks us to consider, what would we do in the face of such trials? Would we cling to our faith, or would we falter? For Job, the answer was clear. Even as he stood amidst the ashes of his former life, the Lord gave, and the Lord took away, but blessed be his name. 3. The bodily affliction. The tragedies that had befallen Job were already beyond comprehension. In a single day, he had lost his wealth, his servants, and most devastatingly, his 10 beloved children. Yet, through it all, Job did not sin. He did not curse God or question his justice. Instead, he fell to the ground in worship, uttering the now timeless words, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job's response was a testament to his unwavering faith, a resilience that echoed through the heavenly realms. But Satan was not satisfied. He had failed to break Job's spirit through material and emotional loss. So he approached God again, seeking permission to test Job in an even more personal and excruciating way. One day, the angels once more presented themselves before God, and Satan came with them. God asked, "Where have you come from?" Satan replied, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." God said, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, even though you incited me against him to ruin him without reason." Satan sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Skin for skin," he retorted. "A man will give all he has for his own life. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." God, confident in Job's faith, responded with authority, "Very well, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." With God's permission granted, Satan left to carry out his cruel plan. Job's second test began in silence. At first, there were no raiding parties, no messengers running with dreadful news. Instead, the assault came directly upon his own body. Without warning, Job was struck with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. These sores were no ordinary affliction. They were festering boils, inflamed and oozing, covering every inch of his skin. The pain was unbearable, a constant, throbbing torment that robbed him of rest and made even the slightest movement agony. Job's once strong body, a reflection of his vigor and vitality, was now ravaged and unrecognizable. His skin, once smooth and healthy, was blistered and peeling, covered in scabs that cracked and bled. The itching was maddening, the burning relentless. In his misery, Job took a piece of broken pottery to scrape his sores, desperate for even a moment's relief. His physical condition isolated him from the world around him. He could no longer sit in the comfort of his home or walk among his servants and livestock. Instead, he sat in the ashes, a place of mourning and desolation, scraping his sores and enduring the stench of his own decaying flesh. His physical suffering mirrored the devastation of his life, as if his body itself bore the weight of his grief. Yet, as Job endured this torment, his trials took another turn. His wife, the only family member left to him, approached. Her words were not of comfort or encouragement, but of bitterness and despair. She looked at Job, her husband who had once been the picture of prosperity and strength, and saw only a broken, suffering man. She said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." Her words cut deeply, not only because of their harshness, but because they revealed how despair had consumed her as well. She had lost her children, her home, and her security. Now, seeing her husband reduced to such a pitiable state, she could no longer bear the sight of his suffering. But Job, even in his agony, refused to falter. His response was measured and full of conviction. He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In these simple yet profound words, Job expressed a truth that many struggle to accept. Faith is not contingent on circumstances. It is not a contract with God that guarantees only blessings and comfort. True faith remains steadfast even in the face of suffering, trusting that God's purposes, though often inscrutable, are ultimately good. Through all of this, Job did not sin in what he said. He did not curse God, nor did he succumb to bitterness or despair. His body was broken. His heart was heavy with grief, but his spirit remained unyielding. As Job sat in the ashes, scraping his sores and enduring the silence of heaven, his suffering became a visible testimony to the battle being waged in the unseen realms. To those around him, it might have appeared as though Job was abandoned, a man cursed by God. But in truth, Job was enduring a test that would ultimately reveal the depth and purity of his faith. Job's trials were far from over. His friends, upon hearing of his suffering, would soon come to visit him. Their presence, intended as a source of comfort, would instead become another layer of Job's torment. But for now, Job sat alone in his pain, his faith unbroken, his trust in God unwavering. This chapter of Job's story reminds us of the fragility of human life and the endurance of true faith. It challenges us to consider how we would respond if faced with similar trials. Would we, like Job's wife, succumb to despair and blame God for our suffering? Or would we, like Job, cling to our faith, even when every outward sign seems to point to God's absence? Job's unwavering integrity in the face of such overwhelming pain is a beacon of hope for those who suffer. It shows us that even in our darkest moments, we are not alone. God sees our pain. He knows our struggles. And though His purposes may be beyond our understanding, His love for us never wavers. And so, Job's journey continued, not as a man defeated by his circumstances, but as a man whose faith was being refined like gold in the fire. The trials of his body, though severe, could not touch the strength of his spirit, which remained anchored in the unchanging character of God. The test was far from over, but Job's response had already silenced the accuser's lies, proving that true faith is not dependent on blessings, but on an unshakable trust in the Creator. 4. The friends arrive. Job's suffering had reached its peak. His wealth was gone, his children taken in a single, devastating blow, and his body now afflicted with painful sores from head to toe. He sat alone in the ashes, scraping his skin with a shard of pottery, surrounded by silence and grief. His world, once filled with joy and prosperity, had crumbled around him. But the news of Job's misery did not go unheard. Far away, 3 of Job's friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard of his calamities. Each of them, upon learning of Job's condition, resolved to visit him. They were men of status and wisdom, respected in their own communities, and they shared a bond of friendship with Job that spanned many years. They likely remembered him as a figure of strength and righteousness, a man whose counsel was sought after by all. Now, hearing of his downfall, they felt compelled to come to his side. The journey to Uzi, where Job lived, was not a short one. The 3 friends arranged to meet along the way, united in their intention to comfort and console Job. They carried with them a mix of grief and uncertainty. How could such misfortune befall a man like Job, a man known for his piety and integrity? What words could they possibly offer to ease his pain? When they finally arrived, the sight that greeted them was beyond anything they had imagined. Job, their once prosperous and noble friend, was unrecognizable. His body, covered in sores, was emaciated and weak. His face, once radiant with health and confidence, was gaunt and etched with suffering. The man who had once been a pillar of strength and stability now sat in the ashes, a shadow of his former self. The 3 friends stood frozen, unable to speak. Their grief was so overwhelming that they tore their robes, a traditional expression of mourning, and sprinkled dust on their heads as a sign of shared sorrow. These outward signs of grief mirrored the anguish they felt in their hearts. Without a word, they approached Job and sat down beside him on the ground. They did not speak, nor did they attempt to offer words of comfort. For 7 days and 7 nights, they sat in silence, their presence a testament to the depth of their mourning. The only sounds were the occasional groans of Job, his pain too great to be contained. The silence was both a comfort and a torment. On one hand, it was a recognition that there were no words adequate to address the magnitude of Job's suffering. On the other hand, it left Job alone with his thoughts, his questions, and his anguish. He was surrounded by friends yet isolated in his pain. 7 days is a long time to sit in silence. For Job's friends, the silence was not merely a gesture of respect, but also a reflection of their own inner turmoil. They struggled to reconcile what they saw with what they believed about God and His justice. If Job, a man of such integrity, could suffer so greatly, what did that mean for their understanding of the world? As the days passed, the weight of the silence grew heavier. It was Job who finally broke it. His voice, hoarse and filled with anguish, shattered the stillness. "May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, 'A boy is conceived.' Why did I not perish at birth, and die as I came from the womb? For now, I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest." Job's lament was raw and unfiltered. He cursed the day of his birth, lamenting that he had ever been brought into a world so full of suffering. His words revealed the depth of his despair and the weight of his grief. Yet even in his lament, he did not curse God. Instead, he poured out his pain in the only way he knew how, through honest and heartfelt expression. Hearing Job's lament, his friends could no longer remain silent. They had come to comfort him, and now they felt it was their duty to respond. Each friend would take his turn to speak, offering what they believed to be wisdom and guidance. Yet their words, meant to console, would instead add to Job's suffering. For now, however, the focus remained on the power of presence. The 7 days of silence, though imperfect, were a reflection of the depth of their friendship and their shared grief. It was a reminder that sometimes, in the face of unimaginable pain, the greatest gift we can offer is simply to be there. The arrival of Job's friends marked the beginning of a new phase in his journey, a phase that would test not only Job's faith, but also the nature of friendship and the limits of human understanding. Though they had come with good intentions, their words would soon reveal the challenges of comforting someone whose suffering defies explanation. For Job, their presence was both a blessing and a burden, a reflection of the complexities of human relationships in the face of divine mystery. 5. Conversations with the friends. After 7 days of silence, Job, overwhelmed by his grief and suffering, finally broke down. His lament shattered the heavy stillness that had surrounded him and his friends. What poured out of Job's mouth was raw, unfiltered despair. Job cried out, "May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, 'A boy is conceived.' Why did I not perish at birth, and die as I came from the womb? For now, I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest. Why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul?" These were not the words of a man rebelling against God, but of someone trying to make sense of his pain. Job was grappling with the unbearable weight of his suffering, questioning why life itself was given to him if it was destined to be filled with such torment. His friends, hearing this outpouring of despair, could remain silent no longer. Eliphaz, the eldest of the 3 friends and considered the wisest among them, was the first to respond. His tone was calm but carried an air of authority, as if he were delivering a lesson to a wayward student. Eliphaz began gently, "If someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? But who can keep from speaking? Think how you have instructed many, how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled. You have strengthened faltering knees. But now trouble comes to you, and you are discouraged. Should not your piety be your confidence and your blameless ways your hope?" Eliphaz attempted to console Job by reminding him of his past deeds, and his reputation for righteousness. But his words carried an underlying accusation. Job, the one who had always offered counsel to others, now faltered when faced with his own suffering. Eliphaz then turned to his belief that suffering does not come without cause. He suggested that Job's afflictions might be the result of some hidden sin. He said, "Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it." Eliphaz implied that Job's suffering was not random but a consequence of wrongdoing, even if Job himself was unaware of it. He urged Job to seek God's correction, suggesting that God's discipline was a sign of his care and that restoration would follow repentance. Job, however, rejected Eliphaz's reasoning. His response was filled with anguish and frustration, not only at his suffering but at the failure of his friend to truly understand his pain. Job said, "If only my anguish could be weighed and all my misery placed on the scales, it would surely outweigh the sand of the seas. No wonder my words have been impetuous. The arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks in their poison. God's terrors are marshaled against me." Job insisted on his innocence and expressed his belief that his suffering was not a punishment for sin. He felt abandoned and wounded, not by an unjust world, but by the very God he had faithfully served. Bildad, less patient than Eliphaz, spoke with bluntness, leaning heavily on tradition and the wisdom of the ancients. Bildad said, "How long will you say such things? Your words are a blustering wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. But if you will seek God earnestly and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state." Bildad's words were harsh, even cruel. He suggested that Job's children had died because of their sin, a notion that added to Job's unbearable grief. Like Eliphaz, Bildad held to the belief that God's justice was absolute, and therefore Job's suffering must have a cause rooted in guilt. Job, wounded by Bildad's words, responded with a cry for understanding and justice. He said, "Indeed, I know that this is true, but how can mere mortals prove their innocence before God? Though they wished to dispute with him, they could not answer him 1 time out of 1,000. His wisdom is profound. His power is vast. Who has resisted him and come out unscathed? If only there were someone to mediate between us, someone to bring us together, someone to remove God's rod from me, so that his terror would frighten me no more." Job longed for a mediator, someone who could stand between him and God, to explain his suffering and plead his case. His words foreshadowed the need for a savior, a theme that echoes through the pages of Scripture. Zophar, the most severe of Job's friends, was direct and unyielding in his response. He said, "Are all these words to go unanswered? Is this talker to be vindicated? You say to God, 'My beliefs are flawless and I am pure in your sight.' Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you and disclose to you the secrets of wisdom. For true wisdom has 2 sides. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin." Zophar accused Job of arrogance and self-righteousness, asserting that Job deserved worse than what he was enduring. His words, far from comforting, only deepened Job's sense of isolation and betrayal. Job's response was firm and heartfelt. He maintained his integrity and refused to accept the accusations of his friends. He said, "I have heard many things like these. You are miserable comforters, all of you. Will your long-winded speeches never end? I will maintain my innocence and never let go of it. My conscience will not reproach me as long as I live." Job lamented the failure of his friends to understand his suffering and to offer true comfort. Their words, meant to help, only added to his pain, as they accused him of sins he had not committed. These exchanges between Job and his friends reveal the complexity of human suffering and the difficulty of providing comfort in the face of inexplicable pain. While his friends relied on traditional wisdom and assumptions about divine justice, Job wrestled with the reality of his suffering and his unshaken belief in God's sovereignty. The conversations would continue, each growing more intense, as Job sought answers that only God could provide. 6. God speaks. Job had endured unimaginable suffering. His wealth was gone. His children were dead. His body was ravaged with painful sores. And the words of his friends, meant to comfort, had instead deepened his despair. He had cried out to God repeatedly, pleading for answers, seeking understanding, and longing for a mediator who could bridge the gap between humanity and the divine. For a time, heaven seemed silent, but at last, in the midst of Job's darkest hour, God spoke. A storm rolled in, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, lightning splitting the sky. The thunder's rumble was both a warning and a herald. From the whirlwind came the voice of the Almighty, powerful and commanding, yet layered with wisdom and grace. God said, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy." God's questions were not meant to humiliate Job, but to reveal the vastness of divine wisdom and the limitations of human understanding. Through a series of profound inquiries, God described the wonders of his creation. God continued, "Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me, if you know all this, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth?" As Job listened, he began to grasp the magnitude of God's power and the intricacy of his creation. God described the mysteries of nature, the storehouses of snow and hail, the pathways of lightning, the wild animals that roam freely, and the delicate balance of life that only the Creator could sustain. God asked, "Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high? Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you. It feeds on grass like an ox. Its tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are close-knit. Its bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs like rods of iron. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook, or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you fill its hide with harpoons, or its head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on it, you will remember the struggle and never do it again." Through these vivid images, God illustrated his sovereignty over all creation. He revealed to Job that there was a divine order to the universe, a complexity and grandeur that human beings could never fully comprehend. Job, who had demanded answers and longed for a chance to plead his case before God, now found himself humbled before the infinite wisdom and majesty of the Almighty. The questions God posed did not answer Job's specific concerns, but they illuminated a greater truth. God's plans and purposes are beyond human understanding, yet they are always just and good. In the face of such overwhelming revelation, Job responded with a heart full of humility and awe. Job said, "I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer, twice, but I will say no more." Yet God continued, not to rebuke Job further, but to affirm his divine authority and to help Job see his place within God's creation. God said, "Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? Do you have an arm like God's? And can your voice thunder like his? Then adorn yourself with glory and splendor, and clothe yourself in honor and majesty. Unleash the fury of your wrath. Look at all who are proud and bring them low. Crush the wicked where they stand. Bury them all in the dust together. Shroud their faces in the grave. Then I myself will admit to you that your own right hand can save you." God's words were not cruel or dismissive, but a reminder that Job's suffering was not the result of divine neglect or injustice. Instead, it was part of a plan far greater than Job could understand, a plan that encompassed the intricacies of the universe itself. In the presence of such divine majesty, Job could only bow in reverence. He said, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." With this declaration, Job demonstrated a profound shift in his perspective. He no longer sought answers to his suffering, for he had encountered the one who holds all answers. His faith, tested and refined, was stronger than ever. God's response to Job is one of the most powerful moments in Scripture, a reminder that while we may not always understand our suffering, we can trust in the wisdom and goodness of God. His plans are higher than ours, His ways beyond our comprehension, and yet He is intimately involved in our lives. For Job, this encounter was not merely the resolution of his trials, but the beginning of a deeper relationship with his Creator, a relationship rooted in trust, humility, and awe. This moment marked the turning point in Job's story, the moment when his suffering, though not explained, was placed in the context of God's infinite wisdom and love. It was a reminder to all who read his story that even in our darkest moments, we are never beyond the reach of God's voice. 7. The restoration of Job. Job sat in silence, overwhelmed by the majesty of God's words. He had encountered the Creator not as an abstract concept, but as the sovereign Lord of all creation. His questions had been met not with explanations, but with revelations of God's infinite power, wisdom, and love. Humbled and transformed, Job confessed his limited understanding and repented in dust and ashes. In the wake of this profound encounter, God turned his attention to Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who had misrepresented him throughout their dialogues with Job. God spoke to Eliphaz, "I am angry with you and your two friends because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. So now take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly." The friends, recognizing the gravity of God's words, obeyed immediately. They brought the sacrifices and presented them to Job, who prayed on their behalf. In this act, Job demonstrated his humility and grace, interceding for the very friends who had added to his suffering. God, true to his promise, accepted Job's prayer and forgave them. The restoration begins. Then, in a moment of divine grace, God restored Job's fortunes, but he did not merely return Job to his former state. He blessed him with twice as much as he had before. Job's once empty fields were now filled with life again. Thousands of sheep dotted the hillsides. Herds of camels wandered the plains, and cattle and donkeys roamed freely. The emptiness that had defined his estate was replaced with abundance. The sound of servants working cheerfully returned to his household. But God's blessings were not only material. He restored Job's family as well. Job and his wife were blessed with 10 more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. These children were a testament to God's compassion and his ability to bring new life even after the deepest sorrow. A new legacy. Job's daughters were named Jemimah, Keziah, and Karen-Happuch, names that reflected beauty and grace. They were described as the most beautiful women in the land, and Job gave them an inheritance alongside their brothers. An extraordinary act in that time, showcasing Job's renewed spirit of generosity and fairness. The joy that had been stripped from Job's life was now restored, not as a replacement for what he had lost, but as a new chapter filled with hope and abundance. God granted Job a long and prosperous life, allowing him to live another 140 years. He saw his children's children to the 4th generation, a profound blessing in ancient times, symbolizing the favor and faithfulness of God. Though Job's trials had been severe, his story ended with a sense of completeness and restoration. The scars of his suffering remained, but they were now marks of a faith refined through fire. Job's story reminds us that God's plans are always greater than our understanding, and his ability to restore and bless is beyond measure. Through Job, we see that faith and humility, even in the face of great suffering, lead to a deeper relationship with the Creator, a relationship filled with hope, renewal, and peace. 8 Lessons from Job's story. The story of Job is not just about suffering and restoration. It is a profound exploration of faith, humility, and the human relationship with God. Through Job's trials, his questions, and ultimately his encounter with the Creator, we learn lessons that resonate across time and speak to the heart of every believer. First and foremost, Job teaches us that faith is tested in suffering. Job's life was a testimony to faithfulness even before his trials began. Yet, it was in the crucible of suffering that his faith was truly tested and refined. He lost everything: his wealth, his children, his health, and still declared, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." The story challenges us to examine the foundation of our own faith. Is it built on the blessings we receive, or does it rest firmly on trust in God's unchanging nature? Job's trials force us to confront a difficult truth. Faith is not a guarantee of a life free from pain. Instead, faith calls us to trust in God's goodness, even when circumstances seem to contradict it. Another lesson from Job is the importance of humility before God. Throughout his dialogues with his friends, Job maintained his innocence and demanded answers from God. Yet, when God finally spoke, revealing the vastness of his wisdom and the intricacy of his creation, Job realized the limits of his understanding. In the presence of the Almighty, Job's questions faded, replaced by awe and repentance. "Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know," Job confessed. This moment reminds us that while it is natural to seek understanding, there are mysteries of God's plans that are beyond human comprehension. Our response, like Job's, should be one of humility and trust, recognizing that God's ways are higher than ours. Job also teaches us about the power of restoration and the character of God. While Job's suffering was immense, his story did not end in despair. God restored Job's fortunes, blessing him with double what he had before. However, the restoration was not simply about material wealth or even the gift of new children. It was about the deepened relationship Job now had with God. Job's faith had been refined through his trials, and his understanding of God's sovereignty had grown. This restoration reminds us that God's purposes, though often hidden, are always for our good. He is a God who brings beauty from ashes, who turns mourning into joy, and who restores what has been lost. Finally, the story of Job offers a powerful lesson about the need for compassion in times of suffering. Job's friends, though well-meaning, caused him greater pain by insisting that his suffering was the result of sin. Their failure to empathize and their reliance on rigid theological arguments highlight the danger of offering easy answers to complex situations. True comfort comes not from explanations, but from presence, understanding, and love. Job's story challenges us to be better friends to those who are hurting, offering support without judgment and listening without condemnation. At its core, the story of Job is a reminder that suffering is not the end of the story. Though we may not always understand why trials come, we can trust in the goodness and sovereignty of God. Job's declaration, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you," encapsulates the ultimate purpose of his journey, a deeper, more intimate relationship with the Creator. For every believer, Job's journey offers hope. It assures us that even in our darkest moments, God is present, working behind the scenes to bring about His perfect plan. It reminds us that faith is not about having all the answers, but about trusting in the one who does. And it invites us to rest in the assurance that no matter how deep our pain, God's restoration is greater still.